This is Helene Arts. We lost my portion of the audio in this interview with Jex Blackmore, so we overdubbed it and hope you'll enjoy it. Hello, everyone. My name is Helene Arts, and I am one of the co-hosts for the Flambeau Noir International Left-Hand Path Conference. This conference is being held in Ottawa, Ontario, from the 28th to the 30th of April. Today I have the very great pleasure of having a discussion with Jex Blackmore, who is one of the presenters at Flambeau Noir. I'd like to start off, Jex, if I may, by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role within the Satanic Temple.
Sure. I am a national spokesperson for the Satanic Temple and a director of the first chapter that we started outside of the national organization in Detroit. I started working with the Satanic Temple shortly after they announced their existence at a Harvard University lecture because I was a self-proclaimed Satanist and had been writing on the topic for quite some time. So I was very curious about their brand of Satanism, their interpretation of that. And in meeting with Lucian Greaves, we discovered that we have very similar ideas about kind of the evolution of satanic thought, in especially in being one that is not hidden behind closed doors, as one that participates very actively in a community and advocates for oneself. So we kind of started collaborating on those ideas, and the organization has evolved since that moment.
We'd be curious to know when you're, talking about the evolution of satanic ideals and the evolution of satanic thought. What would you say is the difference between the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Satanism has been around for a very long time in different forms, and certainly LaVey kind of put modern Satanism on the map and made it something that is a cultural, there's cultural concepts of in every household in many ways. And those are kind of informed by the kinds of things that he did and spoke about in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But, the difference, and we feel very much that we are distinctively different than them because the texts that inform the Satanic Bible, the text that informs LaVeyan Satanism, were written many years ago now, many decades ago, and we believe has since lost relevance, especially when we talk about the value of the natural world and science and understanding our reality. So we very much just are distinct from them in that we reject ideas of social Darwinism, might is right philosophy as being harmful and also since disproven. We also reject authoritarianism, which is something that's kind of been fetishized by the LaVeyan Church. And also there's a lot of philosophical concepts of the female and the female power within the Church of Satan as being one that's related to her physical beauty or presence of her physicality, and that's something that we also reject, in that women have a lot more agency or equal agency and are human beings beyond their physical capacities. So we do see ourselves as the kind of modern evolution of that satanic philosophy.
One thing that comes to mind, when we are talking about the evolution of satanic philosophy, we're still at the same time talking about a philosophy that is of the left-hand path. So I would like to ask you if you would tell us, for you, what are some of the defining features of the left-hand path, and what is it compared to the right-hand path?
Sure. Well, I think that the left-hand path and right-hand path conversation and concept is, there's many ways of interpreting it, I think. And certainly there's not one necessarily that's better than the other, although I'm sure some people would argue one way. I think that the right-hand path is very much relating to certain ideas or attitudes, adopting a very specific moral code and belief in a form of judgment, something that's very very much in line with societal thinking and constructs of power. The left-hand path is choosing or adopting kind of an attitude that breaks that taboo, that abandons this traditional set of moralities and, sorry, I have a cat in my face, and is one that, it celebrates kind of the internal humanity within all of us, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad, if those are words you want to use, but in essence, we're talking about humans. So I think the left-hand path doesn't shy away from those things. It confronts them. It's about accepting and embracing that aspect of ourselves without shame. And doing that, it is seen or interpreted as somewhat of a negative, or it can be interpreted as a pejorative term or form of thinking or practice. So I think that's what makes it so subversive in many ways. And in identifying as an outsider and identifying as a part of that subversive nature, I think is what, to me, part of being the part of the left-hand path is. It is, the idea originally about left-hand path being like you can't trust someone with your left hand, that they could be an enemy or they could be hiding a weapon. I think that that's very true, that somebody that fits outside the norms of society then is someone that has been deemed untrustworthy or engaged in some kind of immoral behavior. And perhaps that's true if we want to reject those kinds of norms in society.
Very interesting point that you raised right there. Because yes, the left-hand path is indeed, the mindset and the way of being and the philosophy of improving yourself at the very least. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's certainly foundational. And ironically, the left-hand path has the word evil attached to it. So people will think that being on the left-hand path means that somehow one has given oneself over to evil. Ironically, it's really quite the opposite. So, question for you. What do you think evil is? And why is it so prevalent in our society?
Yeah, I have a very difficult relationship with the ideas of good and evil. I think that they're really both on both sides of the coin are somewhat ridiculous terms because they are very powerful, and we see in politics especially, people use the word evil all of the time, axis of evil, evil terrorists or whatever. But and it's a charged term, and the church, like the Christian church or traditional forms of religion, certainly. That concept of good and evil is the defining feature for their theology. I don't think I don't have a definition of evil, or I just don't. I don't think that it exists. I don't think that it is real. I think that what we talk about when we mean evil is that we talk about negative human characteristics or actions. We talk about aspects of our humanity or our thinking that can result in negative behaviors or treatment of other people, the not having the capacity to relate to other human beings, having empathy. Those kinds of characteristics are typically ones that we define as evil. I would prefer to use the words harmful. Certainly, as humans, we do have the capacity for a great deal of hatred, to commit atrocities, and but I think that those things, instead of shying away from by calling them this blanket term evil, instead we should perhaps embrace those parts of ourselves and then understand that it's not productive for society or good for us as human beings or individuals to murder someone you don't like, for example. It doesn't help us as individuals that have to work within a social world. And in that way, I think the word and concept of good and evil is actually quite harmful to our growth as a society and as individuals. It really seems to kind of demonize ourselves in a negative way and gets in the way of us being able to improve and refine ourselves.
You mentioned, personal celebration of power and the celebration of humanity. In that spirit of celebration, can you tell us on your left-hand path journey a few things that stood out for you as major learnings and realizations that you continue to pull from today?
Right. Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I think the church, in part, is what kind of helped lead me in a direction. As a child attending Christian church, seeing the words evil come up all the time, seeing really an institution of shame and guilt. Uh, Being told as a young child or as a young girl or teenager that you should be ashamed of your sexuality, that it is a sin to feel lustful thoughts, to be jealous, to be envious. All those things are incredibly human and are normal. And in saying that those things are shameful and are evil feelings, what we're doing is really kind of creating an institution of control. And I really started to feel conflicted about these two things, about and feeling very bad about who I was, and kind of, growing up and evolving and reading, especially as a teenager, like Nietzsche and Sartre, a lot of existential philosophy that kind of questions the nature of reality or truth. Foucault talking about sexuality and gender, certain things that the church has kind of hung up on. I started to realize that I identified much more with the kind of human being that was defined as evil or as contentious to norms in society or religion, that those things made much more sense to me than this kind of holier than thou, unaccomplishable feat to become good. And so in that way, I really started to identify as a Satanist. And I went to the University of Michigan and Harvard and studied archaeology and art history and classical literature. And in all of that, I realized that before Christianity, before systems of power, that humans have always remained the same in their kind of immoral acts, one might say, or desires. And so it's really not a condition of society that we aren't good. It is a condition of humanity. And in that way, I think that I am a Satanist and a member of the left-hand path, because that's how it is a product of society in of itself, because those terms wouldn't be there without a system saying that you have to fit into some type of archetype or not. So choosing that status outside, I think, is what has brought me closer and boldly closer to this concept of Satanism. And I think the reason why people call it evil is because it's a powerful tool. I mean, the church has remained in power for a very long time, and anyone who disagreed with the church, feminists, scientists, philosophers, political dissidents, any of those people who challenged the church's theology or practices were deemed satanic or were deemed immoral. And so I think it's really, when it comes down to it, not only a personal form of independence and celebration of humanity, but also a very political or socio-political distinction from systems of power. And that's why evil continues to be such a powerful word in our society, because it's an attempt to control.
Well, speaking of power, and particularly speaking of self-power, I have a question for you, Jex. What for you does the black flame mean? What's your black flame, and how have you been consciously playing that out in your life recently?
Yeah, well, I think that there's always been a part of me that sensed this kind of the power of my own spirit, I guess. And opposed to a lot of people who adopt a kind of spiritual or supernatural system of belief, which I do not. I believe very strongly in the power of our own mind and our power of our own bodies. And I do believe that there's a lot of our psychology that's still misunderstood or undiscovered. And 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 the desire to kind of learn more, and then working within groups of people to do that in terms of the left-hand path. So belonging to a coven, reading tarot. And I started doing some of that at a young age and feeling that transformative power that that inspired in a group setting and then alone with meditation, I think really drove me to understand and celebrate this kind of black flame idea that not only is it just kind of some personal obsession, but that personal obsession kind of comes from somewhere, and that the practicing and acting out and taking the next step really changes and defines who we are and has the capacity to change those around us, I think. And so, you know, I remember a moment as a teenager reading tarot, and I was gifted a tarot deck. And you have to, I mean, I decided that I would kind of really try to bond with my deck. So, you know, I buried it under the full moon and I slept with it under my pillow. And then I wanted to go through each card and kind of use the elements to kind of imbue each card with power. And then in the middle of this ritual that I kind of wrote, I fainted. I passed out. I became incredibly hot. And I've never done that. I've never done that since either. But I think in that moment I realized that I have so much power to impact my reality and impact my spiritual understanding of myself. And that has remained with me, you know, forever. And again, I don't believe that it's magic. I believe that it is human, and what's human can be magic maybe in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, you referred to your own power to influence your reality. But we know that you're also working on projects that go beyond influencing your own reality, and we're looking at projects that influence the reality around you. Can you tell us what you've been working on recently, and what that means for you?
Yeah, so there's a few so traditionally modes of work that I've worked in has been kind of social like cultural jamming. So I kind of started by writing like writing independent publications about kind of radical thinkers as a way to kind of reach people. And I've always been obsessed with the idea of communicating. How do we communicate with people to help them understand their own power? Because nothing saddens me more really than to see someone in a state of oppression, even self-imposed or otherwise. I think a lot of our oppression is self-imposed. So with the temple, at least, or coming into the temple, I have planned and performed several public actions. At the temple, we have done, unbaptism rituals, which I think were very transformative and powerful for those involved who had to go and retrieve, baptismal water from the churches they were baptized in and kind of extinguish them. And those kind of symbolic elements are and have been incredibly powerful. I use a lot of nudity in the public events or public or private rituals I've been involved with, but not female nudity, because I feel like that is a little cliched in the satanic ideal. And also we have so much of that in society. So I use a lot of male nudity in non-normative bodies because I think it forces people to confront their ideas of what is beautiful or what is what they're comfortable with. And the participants, who are usually strangers that come together and take their clothes off, are transformed people when they leave. It's a cathartic experience. And so I work very hard in everything that I do to create cathartic experiences and to encourage people to face kind of their own transformation. But I feel also that is hard to do in to impact large groups of people. It's much better done in small groups. That's why I've been doing that. But I've been working on a project that's a film that will play in large public spaces on street fronts. That's a 24-hour film that will loop days and days and days on end, hopefully. But And it's just of a woman waiting in a hotel room for her abortion procedure. And one of the reasons I chose that is because it's, the whole abortion legislation, whether or not your position on the topic is fueled very much by religious belief, or is fueled by a desire to appease the church and their vote and their constituents. And that disgusts me, because I think that women should have the right to do what they wish with their bodies without the church or the government telling them what, dictating those things to them. So I'm in the process of editing this film, and the idea is that it's going to be in these public spaces so that people are very much confronted with the reality of what this does, that they are forced to contend with the millions of women around the country that are inconvenienced, who are in distress, for no reason other than that the church and their political pundits demand it. And it's a different approach. It's an approach that's certainly I know some people would call it satanic, and but not one that I would necessarily deem kind of in a satanic practice as I have done before. But it's all about how to find ways of communicating with people in non-traditional ways, and to appeal to an emotional state in order to change and empower individuals.
Jex, I know that you started working on this film prior to the current government coming in, so I'm imagining that that's had an impact, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what that impact has been. Has there been?
Yeah, it was. It hasn't changed very much. And I know a lot of people have the temple has seen a rise in membership, and a lot of people are taking to the streets. But that's been something that I've been doing for many years now. Trump in America might be, and the rise of this kind of conservatism or nationalistic movement isn't actually anything very new. It's been around, and it's been growing, and it goes, it comes in waves. And it's concerning. It's always been concerning. And just because somebody's kind of now head of state and bringing those things up and kind of throwing it in your face doesn't change the fact that it was there to begin with. So my work has been, my political work has been very much about addressing that issue, and that hasn't changed. It has become a little scarier, I've received death threats all the time. I receive them weekly just from my work in general. And it does frighten me that those people may now be emboldened or empowered to take action. But that also is not going to change what I do. It might just change a little bit how I live my life.
And I suppose that, in some very important respects, the new government has made your film that much more relevant, certainly perhaps in terms of the quickening of it.
Yeah, oh, certainly. Seeing the Right for Life March in Washington that happened a few months ago, our elected officials standing on a podium saying that life wins and praying to God, it's abhorrent to me, because that's something that I would expect and approve and believe is everybody has the right to practice and believe whatever they want, regardless of what it means or what it is. But trying to institute that, we've seen time and time and time again, is a form of oppression, is a form of control, is a form of manipulation, and it's just it's scary, because it is something that's going to become, at least in the next 4 years, much more relevant, and we need to make sure that we as citizens stay a lot more aware, a lot more vigilant, and be prepared to get uncomfortable and address those issues. And that's something, thinking about Satanism too, and this kind of evolution that I was talking about is very important to me and the people that I work with, that there is a kind of form of Satanism where you just listen to like heavy metal, Bathory, and read the Satanic Bible, and light black candles and stay in your room and don't talk about it. And I've heard a lot of Satanists or self-defined Satanists say that the temple is just kind of these liberal activists who are just using the satanic term as a form of, in order to get attention. And that is incredibly disappointing to me, because I believe that the satanic figure has always been one that has challenged systems of arbitrary authority, that has rebelled against tyranny. And what good are we doing if we just say we don't want to be involved in politics, we don't want to advocate for ourselves? Well, then we are allowing this religious system of oppression to control us, and we are just going along with it, and that to me is unacceptable. And I'm not a nihilist, so I can't just sit by and say that that's okay, and I'll just allow that to impact my life in whatever way that, and whatever will, beyond my own agency.
Yes, and there is that level of ignorance, I suppose we could call it, that causes people to latch on to the ideal, of Satanism, of Satan, and
Right.
but latch on to it in terms of an artifact.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, you've seen that come up time and time again. You've seen it, especially with the kind of witch fetishization of the witch thing that's been happening on social media with young girls. I think that it's disappointing, because there is a true level of subversiveness when you do identify with the occult or the left-hand path, and it cannot be and should not be used lightly. It takes a very real commitment and a real risk and a real becoming of oneself to reach that point. I do acknowledge and realize the power of it being an empowering idea to certain people or young people. And I think that anything that's empowering young people is good in many ways, or a positive thing. But I do think that we must demand accountability, because by whitewashing it, then we're also reducing the power of it in and of itself. And that's a danger, I think.
Of commitment and risk, tell us where you are right now with your film. What stage are you at?
So we're in editing right now, and it will be several months. The next step is finding locations for it to be shown. And so we're really looking at every major city in every state, and maybe some overseas where it's relevant. But it will take commitment from these public spaces to be willing to face some criticism, a level of criticism, certainly. And we'll go from there. But it's a lot of work to edit 24 hours of film, I'm realizing.
You mentioned that it's going to take commitment from the public spaces, which undoubtedly it will. But there's also that commitment from you, and the anticipated, I would imagine, backlash that's going to be coming your way for putting something out like this.
Yeah, certainly. I found out recently that people think that I eat children, and that little devils fall out of my gaping vagina, and that I get abortions on purpose. And there's just a whole world of people who find it very interesting, or how ironic that I'd be a Satanist and also advocate for women's rights, for example. I mean, it's not ironic, obviously, but if we're going to encourage change, if we're going to encourage a change of thinking, you have to be willing to take certain risks. You have to be willing to put yourself outside of your comfort zone. You have to be willing to face criticism, and if you aren't, then it's hard to embrace that kind of transgressive part of our own spirit. If you fall in line constantly, then you're certainly missing something out of life, I think, regardless of the danger involved.
Something out of life, and also missing the opportunity for that black flame to burn ever so brightly. Thank you, Jex, for sharing your thoughts on these things. I'll just take a moment and switch gears for a bit, because we're people, we're curious about each other and about each other's lives. What your daily life is like.
Well, I don't have very much of a routine, unfortunately, although sometimes I wish I did. I am an artist and a writer, and those things don't pay very much money. But it's so I live in a life of flux. So I have many projects that I work on that's related to art and design and research that I do for money. And so I'm a contractor, arts contractor, which allows me to work for myself and be my own boss, which is amazing. And then I try to dedicate every day to a period of writing and research, and then for whatever project is next. So editing a film, for example, or organizing sexual education programs for teenagers, or writing a porno. These are some projects that are kind of in the works. So, and then reading. So it's always a little bit hectic, trying to go place to place. And Detroit's it's a really amazing place to be right now. It's just kind of flourishing in a really interesting way, and I love being here. And there's incredible thinkers and creative people and resources that are unending. And so it's just, I guess every day is just a long list of different meetings and different projects and goals that I'm trying to get to. And I don't usually get to them all, but I try. It's hard to, it is hard. It's hard to be doing these things that are especially subversive, and trying to pay your bills and do what's normally expected of us. So it's kind of about maintaining a level of sanity for myself, and being true to what my goals are.
Well, to start to finish off the conversation, Jex, wondering if you could say a few words about the Flambeau Noir conference and your presence there, which we're really super glad that that's happening.
Well, I think that this is a really amazing event. I think that, again, as we were just talking about, it's important to keep having conversations about these ideas, to maintain a level of thought. And certainly the people that you're bringing in have all dedicated so much of their life to thinking about these things, and evolving on certain kind of modes of thinking in terms of the occult or the left-hand path. And I hope that people are able to come so that we can experience these kinds of conversations together and have a real dialogue, instead of me just, writing something out there and just hoping people read it. It's an opportunity to kind of converse. And I'm thrilled that it's happening. I hope that if people aren't able to go, that there's a chance that we'll be able to share with them what's happened, but at the event. But I'm excited to, with people that have this kind of black flame within themselves, nothing is more powerful than kind of joining together in one space to see kind of what happens.
That's absolutely true. And yes, we will be producing
Great.
a DVD of the conference, so that people who are not able to attend can at least get a hold of the learning that happened during Flambeau Noir. And it's not only for those who were there in person. So thank you again, Jex, so much for agreeing to come and chat a little bit. Really appreciate that. We're so much looking forward to meeting you in person, and that's a really good point that you raised.
Of course.
Having all those black flames together, flickering brightly, in a group, exchanging ideas and thoughts and presentations over a weekend is going to be absolutely amazing. We're, again, very happy that you're going to be there with us. So I think for now, what I'll end with is, again, to encourage people to visit our website, flambeaunoir.com. And on the website, you can get all of the ticket information. And if you're coming from outside of Ottawa, hotel information. We've set up a lot of different options for tickets and for hotel stays, with the idea of reducing costs as much as possible for people. So check it out, and we'll see you at Flambeau Noir. Bye, everybody.